Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to check and make sure that we can be heard in the Zoom webinar. Matthew or Jake, can you hear us? Oh, that's right. Matthew's not here.
Yeah, it won't be Matthew.
We have extra?
No. No, she's actually scolding me for putting so much out there, actually.
Okay, I think we are ready to begin when you are,
Because we need
Chair Crandall.
some kept back to keep things stable. Skedaddle. I said that first.
All right, welcome back from our lunch break, and we will now continue on with the rest of the budget items, and I'll give the floor to Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So the last budget units up are the Administration Office, and we would like to start with Human Resources, Budget Unit 1341, found on page D28, and we are requesting appropriations of, to be determined as I get to that page, $1,664,540, and I'll turn it over to the Human Resources Director, Pam.
Hi, Pam Samek, Human Resources Director. We also have Diana Rico, Deputy Director, with us today. Human Resources, we deliver workforce planning, employee recruitment, benefits, administration, performance management, policy development, training, union, employee relations, and anything else that comes our way. We have 8 full-time allocations, and we are currently fully staffed. Last year, our major accomplishments is we maintained integrated service delivery for all of HR. We finalized or helped finalize the implementation of class and comp. We helped complete the union negotiations and got 3 years of MOUs done. We updated the recruitment rules. We streamlined the hiring process by looking at 15 years of workers' comp data and recommending that 50 jobs move from physicals to just a questionnaire, which helped streamline the hiring process. We helped coordinate hiring of 180 full-time employees. We updated our interactive process. We created a new performance management system and evaluation forms. We created a record retention policy and cleaned up 45 years of old data. We also kept up with the ever-changing COVID protocol. Challenges that we're looking at over the next coming year include still hiring and retention. In 21-22, we input 416 recs, which resulted in 180 hires. This doesn't include extra help employees. Retention still an issue for us. We had 147 terminations during the fiscal year, resulting with 46% of new hires leaving in the first year of employment. So most of those reasonings for leaving in the first year, 10% the county asked them to leave, 10% they took new jobs, 7% they relocated, 5% job satisfaction, and 10% were unspecified, and then some peppering there. We also had 18% that retired last year during the last fiscal year. Our turnover for the 2021-22 year was 17.66%. According to the BLS, government was right around 18% for the same time period. But nationwide, we're not doing too bad. Last year, during the Great Resignation, was 57%. So when you look at that, we're not faring quite as bad. We actually, this year, for the first time in the last 3 years, retained some employees. The last 3 years, we tended to lose everybody, not everybody we hired, but the same amount of people we hired. So we're making a little bit of progress, which I am thinking the class and comp has had helped with that success. Next year, we hope to focus on hiring and retention and a lot of training. We still need to update policy and forms to get things more automated. And we hope to do management training with interviewing and recruitment, effective onboarding, coaching, communication and conflict resolution, evaluation and performance management, and leaves. And then we also want to train to the interactive process. Any questions?
I don't see any.
I won't say too much about it, but again, obviously, we need to figure out how to do better than seeing those increases on our public liability, because that's a huge hit on this specific budget. But you also went from 110,000 to 360,000 for professional and specialized services. Kind of curious as to what those services might be. I know we've done a lot of recruiting, and I'm wondering if it has something to do with that.
It will have some to do with that, but $100K is the scanning project that we're currently undertaking. We asked for $25,000 to hire a programmer to help us with some reporting out of Cognos. $100K towards training. And we asked for $25,000 to help increase recruiting, outreach, and advertising. So that's $250,000. The liability claim, I believe that was just one incident or 2 incidents. So not 100% in our control. A mishap, and it was a significant injury. And the other one, I think you guys know about.
And I'm not looking for those details,
Yeah.
but I think that it's something to keep in mind, because it's just money that goes out and it doesn't provide anything back in return. Where does the CSAC stuff fall into? Is that administration or is that HR?
That's under training, but actually gets charged back to the departments.
Okay.
Each department undertakes their own. The program that we did last year won't be available this year because they're moving it to the Sacramento area. So it would require a lot of travel. So I am looking for something to replace that, but also some staff level training. We hope to bring back the MHN training that we utilized and did here in Chambers with staff. Now that COVID, well, knock on wood, seems to be diminishing a little bit, I think we can start in-person training again. And I think that's going to be really important.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, sticking with the HR theme, we're moving on to Budget Unit 9917, Employee Wellness Program, found on page D385. And the requested budget there, appropriations, is $276,721.
And that is Fund 918, and that is the self-funded, oh, no, on my end,
It's 917.
917. Oh, I grabbed the wrong one, sorry. 917 is our self-funded dental and vision, health and wellness. That's pretty consistent with what we've done. Of course, there are increases in dental. Health and wellness, we hope to focus a little bit more on health and wellness over the next coming year and incorporating some programs, working with Blue Zones to look at overall health and wellness. Dental and vision are consistent with what we've done in the past. Questions?
All right.
All right, next one is Budget Unit 9918, Unemployment, found on page D 387, and the requested appropriations are $808,706.
And this is unemployment. Claims have been pretty consistent. They've been higher in the last 2 years due to COVID and turnover. Not much to say about that one.
No.
Questions?
Not seeing any.
Just seems like it's that new theme of whatever you say due to COVID. It's impacted.
Unfortunately.
It's impacted so many things.
Yeah, it really has.
All right, so thank you, Pam and Diana. Next up, Patrick will present Budget Unit 1072, which is cannabis. Found, yeah, he's on Zoom. I texted him. Found on page D9.
Good afternoon, Board. Patrick Sullivan, County Tax Administrator. I was asked to do sort of a higher level review of some of the history of tax and revenue in this unit. So if it would please your Board, I can begin with that.
Sure.
Yes.
All right, I'll share the screen. All right, so this sheet shows some of the statistics behind the cannabis program. If you're looking here,
We still have a file folder open.
oh.
Perfect. No, oh, sorry, it wasn't you, it was us.
Oh. You try that again then. Are you seeing?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so this is just a history of revenue in the cannabis tax program. First year was that 267,000 up to 526,000, 486,000. 2021, we had that much larger jump to just a little over 8.3 million. 2021 or 21-22, we were trending upwards at that point. We had more projects coming online. And I'll zoom in a little bit, just hopefully this makes it clear. We had more projects coming online, but as your board will recall, there was that 50% tax reduction across the board for cannabis cultivation tax. And there was also the adjustment to the canopy area, that instead of taxing the cultivation area, we began taxing the canopy area, which on average resulted in another 15% reduction. So even though we had that upward trend in total amount of square footage or acreage being utilized in the county, we still saw that drop in tax down to just over 6.4 million. The other category of revenue in this that's probably worth mentioning is the state aid. These are the various grants that we received. The Public Health and Safety Grant, Cannabis Equity Grants, and let's see, the Local Jurisdiction Assistance Grant. So we received a little over $1 million 2021. 21-22, we received 3.88 million. There's some of this is reimbursable, some of it's paid in advance, but that gives an idea of where that revenue stream is coming. And that's all made up ultimately of state cannabis tax dollars that are being redirected to Lake County. I understand there are questions about expenses, just what's gone through, because there is that difference in this category between what's allocated and what has actually been expended. So the history of expenses here, if you look at 18-19, it was 40,000, then up to 64,000 in 19-20, a little over 300,000 in 2021, and then 1.3 million in 21-22. Just so if you're trying to get the idea of what that difference was each year, This is revenue. This is including penalties and interest and some other factors. But that tax minus expense, this is where this stands. There's this on a yearly basis, and then there's this cumulative basis over here. So when you look at the total here, that's where it's at if you take all the revenue that's come in and subtract those expenses from it over the life of the program. And that's highlighted down here too, just if anyone's looking for that. So, and this represents a moment in time in our system. I've been trying to put this together over the last week or two, but there's been constant updates. So these numbers are still subject to change. It's just trying to give a rough idea of where things stand. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them on this page.
I'm slightly confused on the numbers that are different. So I see the 267,59304 on the very top line for 10-95, and then under the tax revenue combined. But then the 548 doesn't match the 526, the 46. I'm not quite sure what's the difference between tax revenue and the top line that says 10-95.
That's because there's penalties and interest that are included later, and there's also refunds at play in some of these numbers. So all of these are sort of in flux. That's the best that I could give right now.
So like 1095 was our budgeted amount that we anticipated like the raw amount that we received, nothing more, nothing less?
Yeah, up here, exactly. These basically represents the true tax payments that were made without any of those other adjustments that came later.
Okay, and then for the first column under tax expenses, that's what we actually spent?
Correct.
And the tax expense fiscal year, that's what we allocated to spend but didn't spend?
Yeah, what this column represents was just this minus the revenue that came in minus the expense of that year.
Okay, gotcha. So that's like the carryover balance from that fiscal year.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay.
And I know we've changed the policy. We've adjusted the policy during this time. So since there have been changes of policy, it's a little hard to reconcile all of that. But yeah, if you're looking at just the gross revenue versus total revenues versus total expenses, that's what that column's trying to do.
Okay.
Any other questions on this?
Not at the moment.
Okay, and then I can run through the cannabis tax policy, policy and procedures as last approved by your board. Give me a moment here. So this is our current County of Lake cannabis tax usage and expenditure policies and procedures. If you recall, there are various categories in here. This is covering both Measure C and Measure K taxes, the cultivation tax and the business tax. The major adjustments that were made last time regarded just the procedures behind this, because it was varying whether a department head was requesting funding or whether a board member was bringing forth a project and funding request. Let's see, so then here is the allocation of funds, and I'll run through this. So there's 30% allotted. Well, actually, I'll skip ahead. There's some predefined sets in here, which include the CAN grant section. That was at 500,000. That's what was set as the last allocation. Previously, the CAN grant allocation was used to actually, we had that application program here where departments could put in for the money. That process became somewhat burdensome on some departments, and during that last policy change, this was left in place for anything that came forward through either of those pathways above, whether through a department head request or board member request, that didn't really fit one of the other categories. So this allocation be used to fund projects that are not encompassed by one of the existing allocations. And the grants would still be awarded through that same process, but really that turns into more of a line item in the budget at this point. So that's why that still exists, and that's something that your board could consider in the future, how they want to handle that. The workforce retention development was put in, and the allocation suggested at the time was 3.25 million. That was to support departments across the board. There was a Board of Supervisors discretionary spending fund at 500,000 with the 100,000 allocation split across each of the 5 districts. There was the capital improvement and deferred maintenance fund at 1 million, and that was discussed during public services. Roadmap task force, that has an annual allocation of 1 million, although that's what was set last time. I understand that it may not actually utilize that, but that is what was set in the policy. The remainder is split across these other areas. Planning, code enforcement, water resources, environmental health gets 30% of the remainder. Law enforcement, 30% of the remainder. Economic development, housing risk reduction, 30% of that remainder. And youth programs would receive 10% of that remainder. Probably the only thing worth highlighting in youth programs was that a lot of the background that went into that revolved around the state discretionary spending of cannabis tax revenue, which was set at 60% of their discretionary revenue. Those programs have been pretty targeted towards a lot of behavioral health concerns with juveniles, interactions with the criminal justice system. And we have taken advantage of some of the grant programs. That's where, for instance, the public health and safety grant is partially allocated, where we're providing that 500,000 to the Office of Education to run that RAP program with probation. The remaining category is the Stabilization Fund, and that's where a minimum of a year of ongoing expenses was what the suggestion was. And that's so want to have enough money set aside in there to cover that. Because this policy only really started last year, it's new. This is the first year that we're really doing this review. So if there are any questions on this sheet, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I can move on.
Good.
I'm just curious, with all the big numbers being taken out and what's already been spent, if there's about 14 million left, I'm not sure how much the stabilization has in there, but I'm kind of counting that there might be between $5 and $7 million still left that's allocated to the percentages. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you'd like, I have another sheet where I can get into that a little bit more, where I can put up those different categories and show you different scenarios of where those numbers come in.
I was just looking for a global response. I didn't need to get the details, but that's up to if the board wants to see that or not.
From what I understood, the stabilization fund was already filled eventually, because that's what we were waiting for, right? Not
The stabilization part, yes, is filled.
That's what I thought.
And it does need to stay filled because any expense you have during that year is straight out of there until we receive revenue in the earliest January. So that's what.
And how much is in the stabilization fund?
Patrick will have to answer that one, but it should be, it's supposed to be 1 year of the salary, so it should be probably about 4.5. What is it, Patrick?
Yeah, and I actually had a few questions about that depending on how we interpret that stabilization fund, because there are those other allocations that were made over time that didn't fit into other categories. So the employment part could make up that 4.5 million, but depending on how we consider those other categories, it really could be more like 9 million that would be in there. But I guess that depends on how we're viewing carrying over funds in these other categories, and I'm not sure how the board wants to proceed on that.
And the reason why he's bringing that up is last year we talked about where last year was going to be the start of carrying forward. Everything else was going to be dumped into the stabilization to be utilized.
I can put up that other screen if it's helpful, or if there are questions about any of these categories, I can answer them before we go on to that.
I personally think that sheet would be helpful.
Yeah, let's put up the
Okay.
sheet.
Okay. So this shows as an example of what went in last year, just treating last year as a standalone, if all the remaining money was to just be be held in the stabilization fund for the moment, this is what the allocation would have looked like after you break out those various pieces. The decision is, I don't know how the board wants to view what carries over in each of these. If you compare expenses versus allocation, thing is, there's been a lot of money allocated, and there's actually, this number needs some updating because there are other projects that have both gone up and down in cost, but this serves as a pretty good ballpark, where about $9 million has been allocated. But if you recall, only the 1.7 million or so has actually been expended. So there's a pretty wide gap between what we've allocated and what has actually been spent so far. Do you want me to run through these categories? I'm not sure.
I'm sorry if it's, I'm just not understanding. The 9.4 stabilization fund, the 9.45 million, that's for things that have been requested but not spent, so we're putting it in the stabilization fund so that it's still available for those that have had that allocation made, that they can still access it?
So what happened, and at least my understanding was that at the end of last year is the first year that we're essentially tracking in this policy. So all the remaining allocation temporarily sat in that stabilization fund at the end of last year because we weren't doing carryover. So this is the first year that we're looking at it where the revenue that came in and where it went.
So from
Within
that,
these
what I
categories.
get is that anything prior to last year that was allocated, yes, would come out of that stabilization.
So we've allocated, basically promised specific departments 9.45 million from what's been approved.
I wouldn't say the whole amount is that, because that also does house the actual stabilization that was supposed to be about 4 million. So
That gets confusing when there's a bunch of different things that make up that, because I mean, I see the total at the bottom is 6 million, and that doesn't make sense to me when there's a $9 million number in the middle of it too. Because I don't think, if we didn't allocate the 30%.
I mean, I can basically take that out for the moment. That was just to show, this was just to give an idea of how last year looks, because this is the first year that we're doing that tracking since the policy changed.
Because, for example, 30% law enforcement. I don't think we got a request from law enforcement to grab any of that 30% last year, or let's just say that we didn't get anything to request any of that. To me, that doesn't need to be in a stabilization fund. That just rolls back over into a fund carryover
example,
balance.
yes.
And then you get another percentage the following year.
that is exactly true for the 30% starting last year. There were law enforcement expenditures out of there, though.
Okay.
There just wasn't law enforcement coming specifically, can I please have cannabis? Things like Flock, those readers, those license plate readers,
Okay.
are part of this. There's 200,000 set aside for the 2 deputies if they ever get down to that level and hire them. That was promised 2 or 3 years ago. And there's also a sergeant and a couple other positions, at least one more, I believe, that are fully paid out of here, reimbursed. So there are some, it's just not every year coming back with a request. Some of those are ongoing.
We're going to have to figure out how to change that over to a departmental coverage, because we really need to see this as a diminishing one-time fund that I just don't, I mean, we'll see. But the expectation, as we're seeing in our budget projections, is that we're going to receive less and less and less. And hopefully we can move over any salaries that are within this into a more ongoing capability to afford it.
Okay, I understand that. I do believe that this is eventually going to turn into, once everything stabilizes, wherever that is, it's going to be considered ongoing revenue at that point. Right now, it is doing too much of
Right.
a curve to be considered straight.
And I guess what number I'm looking for is, what have we not set aside, such as the 500,000 for canned grants of the past, where we have approved those things, 500,000 per year for the Board of Supervisors discretionary funds, the 1 million, all of those, what have we, what is that plus other approved and promised, this is your money because it's come to the board and we've approved it, what's left over as far as right now? What's the carryover balance?
And you want to know per section, because there's not going to be a pot that is literally unallocated, because anything that is theoretically unallocated like that would go into the 30, 30, 10.
Well, I mean, I could do the math for the 30, 30, 10, but what's the overall leftover once you make sure that the numbers are filled in for retention and all that other stuff? What's the carryover balance? That then falls into the percentages.
Patrick should have that information on the sheet.
Yeah, so if this is a different sheet, this is what looking more like a global total of all the revenue that's come in over time. And again, it was hard because the policy was somewhat nebulous on some of this, how we wanted to go forward. But I did attempt to use this set of numbers to play with it. But what I guess I'm not sure about workforce retention. That's a huge block, 3.25 million. Sheet that might actually be better. This is a sheet that basically shows everything that we've done so far, trying to figure out the total that's been allocated. This includes that 3.25 million from workforce retention. And if you look at that, it's just over 10 million. So if you take it out, we're looking at something between 6 and 7 million that theoretically hasn't been allocated yet. But again, this year we aren't going to receive any revenue until January. We had a lot of cultivators tell us that they were not going to grow, that they did not intend to operate further. But then when it actually came down to receiving the forms, stating that they were no longer going to operate or they were reducing, not that many did that. I mean, I believe the total square footage taken out of circulation, the last I saw, would be about 3 million, although that's not final yet. So we haven't experienced the drop-off that was anticipated. I don't know whether that will remain true next year or not, though.
And
Well,
I'm
I
not.
have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that also doesn't consider the grows that we had that have had their permits appealed, that they were growing in early activation and now they won't be. And we had a few of those over last year, and some of them pretty significant. So I'm trying to remember last year when we were talking about the allocations, and there was 30% for risk reduction, but I think I remember that we were being very conservative last year, so that ended up in stabilization.
Well, essentially the way it was left last year, at least under my understanding, was that we were starting this policy fresh. So yeah, anything from the past was sort of temporarily holding in the stabilization fund.
Right, that's what I thought.
And then this year, the other concern is that in terms of trying to forecast revenue was the tax reduction, the changeover from canopy area, which, the 50% plus that 15% on average reduction, coupled with the later payment due dates, and also coupled with all the information that so many businesses were going to stop operating, which so far appears to not be as dramatic as we were anticipating. But again, we don't have those final figures.
You were going to ask another question?
And so again, I'm asking the same question and I'm not getting an answer. Do we have $4 million at this moment of fund carryover balance after everything has been filled up? As far as from last year, 4 million were part of the percentages that were not spent that carried over and now get to be split up again with the anticipation to obtain more of these funds as of January and then later in May for the first and second payment. Approximately $4 million.
I'm going to partially kick that to Stephen, because my understanding, Stephen, would be under the current policy, that's for the board to decide. The policy is not written with a a certain outcome on that, each year your board can decide how to proceed with that. This is the end of the first year of this incarnation of the policy. So if your board chooses to have that carry over as a fund balance going forward, you could, or you could choose to start each year fresh. That's sort of up to you right now, because this is the end of the first year of the policy.
I understand your question. I'm trying to figure out how to answer it. So when we're looking at 1072, when you look at the actual budget that is here, we have 5,761,000 in the budget to transfer to other departments already. That includes things like the 800,000 for water resources for Army Corps. When I look at the Form 5, I do think that 4 million probably would be a good solid number to put in there, and it would be available, yes, with keeping the stabilization where it needs to be as well. The part we need to remember when you look at Budget Unit 1072, it's not just cannabis tax in there. There's also the Prop 64 grants and things. But yes, from the information I'm looking at, I would say 4 million would be good to put into the 30-30-10 for this year.
And I got the 4 million from, we have 14 million based on tax revenue, and Patrick
Allocated
just
10.
said 10 million potentially that is allocated or spent. And again, it's an average. And personally, I don't want to make any decisions on what we could collect, because I think that's really up in the air.
It is.
And since we're collecting all of that by the end of May, I think it's a perfect thing to wait till July to say, okay, this is what we collected. Now we can spend that. Let's wait till we recollect the following year. But I know that there's some major things happening in this county that require funding, and understanding what our carryover balance is going to be really important in the conversation that's about to happen here.
And I'll have Patrick, from what you're saying, the way we had it is, my understanding was, starting at the beginning of last year was fresh. Anything of the 30-30-10 left would carry over, and we need to calculate that specifically for you, so you know what that number is. There is about 4 million, but which category, we'd have to let you know.
All right, because I'm looking at the reserve, the fund summary, final recommended, and that one just gives me a big old number where this is telling me, no, that's not there, no, that's not there, no, you can't touch that because of what we've approved and agreed.
If you're looking at
So it makes it
1072,
difficult.
and you see that big reserve, that is partially the Prop 64 money as well as the cultivation. But the reason why is it's not budgetarily good to have the entire amount out there, because then you're overstating our overall budget by quite a bit. So this is pared down to what might be reality, is what 1072 looks like, and that's why the reserve's there.
What might be reality.
Well, a lot of things can happen, including right now.
And I'll also say next month we will have a lot more certainty. CDD has finished their inspections, as far as I understand. We'll be able to go through all those final results, dig through the files, create the actual tax bills. Hopefully we'll have the final answer on refunds and other credits, and we'll have a clearer picture. It's just that right now we don't have that yet about this year's revenue.
Right, and as I stated earlier, I'm not too concerned about this year's revenues. I think we need to make sure we have them before we start planning to spend it. That would be the smarter way to go, in my opinion. I think you said 13 million square feet is still what the canopy total is at this moment in time?
Yeah, the last information I have from an update with CDD was that there's about 13 million authorized that would be taxable under our ordinance, but about 3 million of that was taken out of circulation. So if you think about it, that's 10 million.
Divided by 2.
Some of it was mixed light, which would charge more, but then there's that 50% reduction on top of it. So it's still going to be greatly reduced because of that reduction in tax base.
Okay.
I have a quick question for you, Patrick. Does the 10 million include the workforce funds?
It does.
Okay, thank you. The reason why I'm bringing that up is we need at least $4 million to BFBA next year to make sure that whatever revenue comes in this year, we have the money to cover the ongoing expenses that have already been approved in this budget unit, which include like flock and a couple of those positions, which I know you want to switch over as soon as we can, but at this stage,
It's not that I want, I think we probably should eventually, but I don't think it can happen right now.
not ongoing financially. One time, different.
I got the answer I was looking for.
As close as we can get right now.
All right.
Are there any other questions about the cannabis tax policy or this budget unit?
I'm not hearing any. So I think, what's the next one? 1892?
Next up will also be Patrick, Budget Unit 1892, found on page D 55.
TID.
And the requested appropriations for that one is $1,260,000 even.
All right, so this budget unit is marketing and economic development. This encompasses all the spending related to the transient occupancy tax policy that your board has. There's the tourism improvement district that's also funded out of this unit through a direct contribution. But again, primarily the majority of the revenue comes from their own assessment. That's separate from the occupancy tax. And again, the occupancy tax this year, the actual was 1 million, just over $1 million. So if there are any specific questions about this unit, I'm happy to answer them. If your board wishes, I can run through the policy as it stands now.
Go ahead.
So I will say this is one of the ones that I've kind of been waiting on. We have a marketing and economic development department or budget unit, but there's nobody working in that department. We are working with the TID, which is very specific about bringing tourism, but not about developing and providing economic development here directly in Lake County, meaning building houses, bringing in new industries or new retail. I know both cities have a contract with retail, I forget what the right term is, but basically a contractor that reaches out to all types of retail industries out there to try to bring them into vacant, like I'm sure that's what they're doing for the old Kmart or have been doing for the old Kmart, things like that. We are not doing any of those things. We are waiting for people to come to us rather than forcing us to be a part of that conversation with people. We used to have that kind of department. I hear that. We used to have that kind of department where we had staffing and we were doing economic development, and that is no longer the case. And I think that we cannot wait for the organic growth to happen. I think we need to create our own methodical growth based on a strategy and based on a plan that increases our property taxes, that increases our sales tax, and that's long-term revenue that we could be seeing, but we're not because those types of things are not happening. I'm looking for the ability to create a team that can do that because we need it. We gave away $8 million to the city of Lakeport and the city of Clear Lake to help them with their housing when we should have a team that's able to do that ourselves here. And so I think that if we want to see continuous growth rather than cross our fingers and hope for growth, because cannabis was good growth, but it's now plunging and it's not going to be that for much longer than it was. I think we hit the peak and we're never going to see anything close to that. And so I want to see, I don't know what the amount is, but I would like to see our administrative staff come back with a budget idea on what that would look like in order to be able to carry out the goals that we would set out for them. There's so many different types of elements in economic development that can occur. Another one is film commission, where people can actually be reaching out to film productions who have been struggling, especially during COVID, to find locations to be able to make their films happen. That's economic development and advertising of our communities by putting our scenery on film and our area on film that doesn't happen even close to enough. So there's just, to me, that's something that we should be very proactive in doing, not waiting for it to happen without the effort of making it happen.
Vice Chair Pyska?
I think there might be a plan in place, because I agree, and I've had conversations with our CAO about that, and when we get to maybe your budget unit, we can discuss that further.
Yes, it's just, it can't really occur until after the first of the year, and I think that Bruno would like it to start sooner, so maybe we can discuss that when we get to 10-12 and further. And I'll share with everyone what my thoughts are in moving forward on our economic development and housing strategy.
So that's housing. You're talking about business?
I'm speaking all the above.
All of the above. Oops, sorry.
And,
All of
and
the above.
as much as I like that idea, I think it's important. I also think, I know with some businesses, they've tried to start and have implanted, got there, and then came up with challenges and stopped. So those are, I wouldn't say internal issues, but we're working on those by stabilizing departments and ensuring some of our administrative fines, things like that are in place, because that'll help stabilize, give them the opportunity to make these adjustments so that their business can flourish. And I've noticed that, especially in my district, quite frequently. But I do like the idea of having a simultaneous economic development, procurement type of, committee or something like that. But I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think you
Supervisor Simon.
definitely agree with telling our own story, and building a department like that, I would definitely, but I agree with, mid-year budget or the conversations we're going to have later as we look into those things, because we all know what we have here, obviously marketing it out to everybody, looking for other hotels to come in to get those tax dollars. We love them to come here and visit, but then they can head back to wherever they're at. So looking at that tourism opportunity, because we've done such a great job with the ag industry, the cannabis industry, everything that we've been building on all these years, but people don't have a place to stay. When I ask you to come to Lake County, you can't come up and drink wine all day and then drive out of Lake County. So I completely agree with the conversation. What it looks like, I'm not sure, but I'd be happy to hear later on when we're talking about it. So in support of that, absolutely. Some of those conversations we had with the Economic Development Task Force and how we do that, not only here at the county level, but engage in both cities and private business owners to be a part of that conversation as we're selling ourselves. So, yeah, I like the conversation. Let's see where it goes. So.
Did you have something?
You just reminded me about a number.
I guess I'll say it in public too. There's also ARPA funds specifically for housing and department, et cetera. So it's not that this wouldn't be funded, it's about organizing it.
All right.
Good.
All right. See any other questions on this, Patrick?
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then thank you, board.
Thank you, Pat.
All right, next up will be Budget Unit 1011, Board of Supervisors, found on page D1. And the proposed appropriations are $1,665,164. And I will turn it over to the CAO, Susan Parker.
Yes, could you please explain before I let you go the increase in the BOS budget and why, which is the cannabis discretionary?
Yeah, no, I know exactly.
Okay.
So the massive, I'll call it massive just because that's a good word. The large increase of about just over $1 million in the appropriations for the board is all related to the remaining cannabis discretionary funds already being in Budget Unit 1011 so that you guys can have your request. and we can pay it instead of every time have to come back to the board specifically for that item. And the revenue associated with that is also budgeted, and that's in 8122. So it's an offset to where there is no actual general fund in your budget unit, but the appropriations do show $1 million higher.
So does that mean, and I didn't ask it during the cannabis one, but does that mean that there was no discretionary funds added for this year?
That is, yes, there was. That's what's remaining, though. Like, each district, we have an actual sheet of each district. Your district has not spent any, but like District, is
Yeah,
Team
I've
4.
spent some in mine, District 4 has spent, yeah.
District 4 has spent some. District 5 has spent all but 100 grand, so 200,000. So it's the remaining balance after all the funds that have already been spent.
I think Tina did some LiDAR stuff, right? I know she did
And
that.
she sent 165,000 over for Scotts Valley Creek project of some kind, right before she left. So that is what actually is the remaining balance. It's with Water Resources currently.
Have we just not seen that?
I don't believe there's enough funding to make it fully go forward.
Okay, so that's why I was like, I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, that was her last wish, was to make sure that funding went over there to help fund that project. And I was told by Water Resources it wasn't completely funded yet, but that money is going to be there.
It's like the restoration funding that's sitting there waiting for that project, right? Yeah.
And as soon as they have enough, it'll move forward, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chair. Your board serves as executive and legislative governing body for the County of Lake. The board establishes county priorities and operating policies, adopts ordinances, and ensures mandated functions are properly discharged. The board directs financial resources through the adoption of the annual county budget, selects and supervises non-elected county department heads, makes important land use decisions, and provides an informed framework to prepare the county's future. Some of the accomplishments, and I'll be brief, is to continue focusing on the amended Vision 2028, Reimagining Lake County. You've also focused on economic development, cleaned up neighborhoods with code enforcement, fostered a business-friendly environment, pursued funding to strengthen communities, marketed Lake County as a premier California outdoor recreation destination, and advocated for the county's needs through targeted political action. What isn't in the budget, and which is what I want to highlight for the community's information, is that with your board's direction, we applied for 3 CDBG grants for $1.3 million for low-income loans for businesses to retain and create jobs. Currently, 10 applications are under review, underwriting, or have been finalized. Industries include retail, hospitality service, ag, and construction, and if all approved, 47 jobs will have been retained or created. There is a remaining amount of this funding for $145,000, so I wanted to get that out there in case there are other businesses interested in pursuing these grants or loans. Broadband. We did apply for the funding for the Broadband Master Plan update, in which the EDA recently approved the Golden Connect grant application. We also applied for $500,000 for the Broadband Fiber Design Network, and recently released the RFP for broadband, which did just close for the broadband implementation consultant. We did receive 6 responses, and we'll be reviewing those shortly and hopefully come back to the board with a recommendation to perform those duties. Federal earmarks. In addition to the Kelseyville Sidewalk Project and the Full Circle Project, your board also approved for submission to Congressman Thompson for inclusion into the President's budget the $998,000 for the Armory repurposing project and $750,000 for the Middle Creek Restoration Project. This has been referenced, but I want to reference it once more, which is the Cal OES Jumpstart California grant, the Chief Climate Resiliency Officer. That grant was worth $636,545. It's a 5-year grant to award for this position. The importance of this position is that it will conduct a vulnerability assessment, which will provide data for the resiliency plan and ultimately create the general plan safety element we desperately need, and hopefully the climate protection plan we also desperately need. Let's see. Okay, those are the main highlights. I wasn't going to go into the cannabis discretionary grant, but we can put that on in a press release if you'd like, since there's so many. Let's see, he already did, yes?
I do want to say those CDBG grants will come up again when I talk about Budget Unit 1796.
Yeah, but I presented, and I certainly do. Oh, and I have one more thing I just have to mention, and you actually have a 20% vacancy rate.
Yes, we do. I was noticing that we're not helping our county numbers.
I just,
Brought the average down.
it's a light moment, I just wanted to mention that. Did you have any questions or have any additional information you'd like me to provide?
Supervisor Pyska?
I have something to bring up, and I don't know which budget unit it would come out of, this one? Okay. So, looking around our board chambers, I feel like we need a little spruce up here. We've got a VCR and that weird clock on the wall.
It's got a DVD player to it, though.
Okay, so,
It's gotta be.
you know, because of COVID, the seats were taken out, and I know the seats are on back order and will eventually get here, but as a source of pride for our county seat, I think we just need a little, take down everything that's not necessary, old technology, maybe some paint. I'm not saying a major renovation, I'm just saying maybe some new art.
Spruce. Just spruce.
I think it's time. I want to, when we're entertaining people from out of the county or our electeds, or we're bringing in PG&E, I feel like this chambers, we should maybe have a little more pride in.
What amount were you looking at?
I don't know, I just kind of brought it up with Susan, and I don't think it's anything major, but it's definitely needed for some things.
Other than the piece of plywood, I can see that the TV is on. I don't have many problems. I love the new additions that have been added. I don't think it's, I want Abe back. I love, where's Abe? We took Abe off of that one. Love to have him back. But I don't disagree with having more pictures, but I don't think that costs anything. I think that's working with the Art Alliance or the Lake County Art, I forget the exact name. It's not the Rural Arts Initiative, but there's another arts group. I love all the pictures that we have all around on the courthouse, and I think that would be a simple thing to just request more and maybe swap them and mix it up from time to time. I definitely have no problems with clearing out the VCR. I think that could be done today before we leave. But, okay, I got a big no. We're going to wreck everything that Sam does.
The VCR is for HR.
Okay.
Maybe we should be talking about updating HRs.
They got VHS tapes.
That was fun.
I'd love to know what exactly the cost would be.
And I did ask Susan about that.
Yes, it would, if we wanted to paint, replace like the clock.
That
maybe-
weird shelf thing that used to hold a monitor.
And this gentleman is right here, might be able to assist.
Yeah, Lars Ewing, Public Services Director. I think something that might fit with this is the capital improvement plan process that has scoring criteria that will identify what overall benefits would a project like this generate in comparison to others. So
Okay.
I think we could put together a scope out a project and then just have it ranked among others. But
Okay.
I'll defer certainly to the board. I mean, any improvements that we've done in this they're not buildings and grounds or public services driven. They're largely preferences of the board, direction from the board and from county administrative office. So I'll end it there and simply say that we're here to help. I will not end it there. I will say that there's certainly an impact. We can't come in here without there being an impact to board meetings. We try to fit it in But it's not just Board of Supervisors meetings that occur in here, and so inevitably, to be perfectly blunt, projects in here are very challenging, and we get pulled off of other projects when we can fit the time in here. So if we do something like that, I want that to be factored in.
That's fine, and, you know, a little at a time is fine too. I know it's going to be a big difference when the chairs come, but I think it's been a long time since some of these things were addressed.
Yeah, I'll defer to the board and county admin for a project that they might want to develop, and I'm happy to participate in that.
I like the idea that you suggested, Lars, that you'd put something together, a proposal, and, we can weigh it against other ones. So there are some little things, though, like, just was pointed, we could take that camera base down, something just little, yeah, well, that's where an old camera was, right, or something. So anyway, just little things like that. I know we've done some work. This is all new, right, within the last 12 months. Even our stuff here, some of the carpet, our new step, all those little things, a safety barrier. So don't disagree, but yeah, I'd like to see what it looks like when we do get the chairs back.
All right, well,
And we do got new ones coming, right?
to be honest, I have no idea.
Steven.
That isn't a facilities.
Oh, okay, all right.
I ordered the chairs in March. They have finally shipped. Now, I will say they're going to be similar to these blue ones, but just a different color and brand new, so fresh, because
Oh, it's not like the old bolted down seating?
no.
Like that, okay.
The previous, not old, the previous CEO did not want to move in that direction. Wanted it to be more flexibility with the room. So that's the kind of, 95 of that style of chair are on their way.
I think too that, just some other thoughts while we're talking about this is things like ADA type of stuff. And what I mean by that is someone that's watching the meeting or in the meeting. I could say anything in Spanish, but I wouldn't be good at it. So like if we had another something showing the words of what we're saying, or even place it onto the Zoom, or even just on this side over there, if we had another TV that did something like that, or if that makes any sense. I think we should be okay on ADA type of stuff, right? I mean, they can just pull like right up front, or
Well, yeah, ADA is a big picture perspective, but from a facilities perspective of ADA, I would suggest that we are
Accessible.
compliant.
Right.
Absolutely, but there's more than simple facilities issues with ADA.
We can put something together, submit it to Lars, and hopefully we can bring something back by mid-year or sooner.
Okay, all right, thank you.
did you have yours up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a simple cleanup is an easy thing to do. I don't know about painting, but
Well, if you take all this stuff off the wall, there's going to be holes. I'm not saying paint the wood or anything. It's just, that clock is going to leave a mark.
well, just put some hands on that thing.
Go back to the 80s.
Hey, don't.
Don't.
That thing was modern back then, I'm sure.
I like
Yeah,
it.
I'll just say it. I think that I've never heard a single complaint about this chamber. Can it be better? Yes. But I would prefer spending money on services and other things than necessarily just aesthetics, because I don't think it looks bad. Can it look better? Yes. So I'm very, in my opinion, limited to what that dollar amount would look like when something comes back.
Yeah, just consider when you go to the Clear Lake City Hall and the Lakeport City Hall, and how fresh and lovely those spaces are compared to this one. And it does, your environment impacts performance and how it feels in a room. And, I'm not asking for a lot. I don't even know what it is. But I think a refresh is in order. And when you're in Clear Lake City Hall, you notice it's beautiful. It's lovely. It feels wonderful. The art is wonderful. And I'm just looking for some relevance and a spruce up. That's all.
I think too, like one of the, I know the clock's there, And I don't, we haven't used it in a while, you know. But at the same time, it's subjective. If I'm a citizen and I'm out there and I'm looking at 3 minutes, you can easily assume that I'm either manipulating the clock or someone else is, even though they're not. But if there's something there that's tangible that they see, even if it's that clock or another one, they could say, okay, well, I know he stopped me for a reason. He's not just trying to shut me up.
Oh, you're talking about that clock?
Yeah,
I'm talking about the
No,
silver one.
not the 80s one. But that one's kind of 80s too, though, if you think about it. So, but either way, like if something's there that,
That's only 2 years old, sir. It just is dead.
oh, okay.
It's dead?
Apparently, it doesn't work
Oh,
right
it
now.
doesn't work? Then get it out of here.
That used to be the actual timer where 3 minutes would show and it would count down.
And that's what I'm referring to. Those type of services are important for, you know, for people that can make comments and, you know, things like that. So I just highlight that, if that makes any sense, so.
I'd be happy to get a new clock like that. Surprisingly enough, those ugly clocks, like $200. But if that's what you guys would like, no problem.
Kitchen timer? We can bring the kitchen timer back.
There is one, but yeah. And just for the record, there's no kill switch either, so just.
The panic button.
Yeah.
So just to, if you,
Yes, Lars,
like,
please.
we'll put a project scope together and come back to admin and just so we can, you know, not point out every single issue here. We'll put something together for you.
Thanks, Lars.
Thanks, Lars.
If you get a bigger TV,
Oh,
you'll
sorry,
hide
go
a lot
ahead.
of that stuff.
Go ahead.
And obviously, you know, I just want to say, we have had a revamp since I've been on the board. When I came on in 2017, I mean, like I said, all of this desk, all this stuff, some of the things up behind us, and, you know, so public services, you guys came in and did some things that were requested by admin or whoever. I know we replaced the carpet. We did a bunch of good stuff. So, yeah, I'd be willing to look at something, but boy, compared to what it used to be, boy, this is modern. So, from my point of view, just with some of the coverings and everything. So we've made a lot of changes, so.
Wasn't it a
Man,
blue carpet that Jim tripped over?
Oh, there was definitely some issues that we had. So anyway,
We even had the plastic glass during COVID, so just.
just want to make it very clear to our public service department, they did some great in-house work that has upgraded us.
All right. If there's no more questions on that or comments, Supervisor Sabatier.
I'd like to move on.
Yeah, please.
We said we would wait until the administrative budget in order to discuss economic development, housing development, and just kind of want to open it up with, I've already made my statements, but I believe CAO Parker wanted to at least provide some words, so.
Would you like me just to begin there? Okay,
It's a great segue.
How do you like that? Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought, especially once Patrick will be moving up to the second floor. And so my thought was that we would convert his position and Ms. Scully's former position into a full DCAO. And my thought then was that it would be for economic development and housing strategy. But I think what we really need is that person would be here, but if you're talking about a team, because you need worker bees, you need those who can complete or understand underwriting for loans, grants, actually assessments of housing needs, assessments of economic needs, doing the outreach, going to the conferences, searching or seeking out, or even understanding what it takes to attract a business as far as foot traffic, vehicular traffic, the amenities that you're willing to offer, what the capacity, what when you draw from a certain area, what they're willing to pay, what they're looking for. I mean, that does take a team to develop that type of plan. So that was my initial thought, and then Bruno and I talked, and I said, I think we do need more. I was going to rely heavily on consultants, but I think we need to also have a really strong team internally to liaison with the local businesses, the departments, and build that cohesive economic development team that works at looking at maybe in order to promote housing, to look at water and sewer hookups, I'm not going to say too much more than that because I know her eyebrow will raise, or look at ways we can incentivize not only investment but reinvestment in our community, and what would that look like? So you have this, I always compare it to a cog. You have this wheel, there's a center, and your focus is the economic development, but within that is parks and rec, arts and culture, businesses, retention, attraction, school systems. I mean, I'm putting out the broader thing, but what we need to do is understand that whole cog of bringing economic development and retaining it into our community, but you need a dedicated group to do it. Someone that when they arrive here at 8 and when they leave here, whenever that is, that's their focus. They're not being pulled off to do the armory swap, Collier Avenue, like me. All those other projects, digitizing records. I mean, we interact so much with all these different departments and all these projects, but for me, it feels it takes away from us focusing on what I do know is a priority for this board, which is economic development for our community. And there's just different elements of it. We're just starting with the broadband. Those are the first steps. That's not going to be an overnight fix, but it's a start. And then once we, with your approval, of course, and direction, start really focusing on housing, workforce housing, would be an area that I would like to focus on, but of course it would be the board. But we won't know until we do an assessment. What do we have? What's our inventory to work with? What land do we have to work with? What are the impediments to doing that housing? And then finding partners. Development doesn't necessarily recognize that line between a city and a county. So it's really good when you start thinking about this, the synergy between what they're doing and what we're doing, and the partnerships that you need in order to succeed. So transportation is another element of economic development. So those are my thoughts. I don't have a graph to show you yet, but again, I think that's something. Once we fill Stephen's position on the fiscal side, then we'll have more capacity to actually develop all this, a housing strategic plan, an economic strategic plan, also funding, or even a housing trust fund. There's a lot of things that we can do, but it needs to be a focus. Instead of being reactive to what has presented itself, we need to be aggressive, proactive, and grab it. That's just my thought, or my opinion. It's just what I've done before. I'm not very patient. I'm not very patient. I'd rather go out and see what we can bring in.
Another description of work, and this may go in 1014, or it probably should have went in the first budget that was even started in this whole thing, is Public Request Act. How much energy and work does the department spend on that? I know that county council deals with, actually I should have asked every single director how much manpower has been spent on that in comparative to like project development. I know at times some directors have told me the fact that they've spent that time on there, they weren't able to complete anything else.
It's significant, and when you're looking through, because now it includes emails, and so you get thousands of emails that you have to go through to make sure there's no attorney-client privilege or medical information. You just can't press a button and print up all the emails related to that subject. You have to go through them all, and then you have to, because we're not fully digitized, you have to go through files. If they haven't scanned it, you have to go through the file. It just takes a lot of time.
Redact? Or does that in coordination with recorders redacting, or is that something totally different? No. Okay.
No, it's.
Sorry.
No.
That's all I had about
Okay.
that.
No, but it is and I can, just from my own interaction and dealing with it, I mean, in my previous job, I may get 5, 10 a year. Here it's 5, 10 a week, it feels like, so.
Supervisor Spate, I know you have a pen up.
So I have a question for Mr. Carter. We have approximately 1,040, 140? What is it?
Overall FTEs?
1060 is what I see, 1060.6.
Bodies.
Not body, 1055.60.
Okay, close, sorry, 1055.60. We have,
3 limited terms, so 1058.
okay, thank you. We have, from my Monday report that I received from Human Resources, a 21% vacancy rate. We've been saying 20, 21, sometimes all the way up to 25 since I got here 4 years ago. We've done a raise, a hefty raise, 2 years ago, just about. It started, I believe, in November of 2020. And then we did another one, not as large, but still another increase, a decent increase last year that again started in November 2021. We're still at that same level. And so one of the reasons I say that is we're struggling to make headway. I think housing is a part of that issue. I don't know too many new incoming employees that I've talked to that have not complained about the issues of finding housing. So I think that that is why I want to quickly move forward on that rather than wait until midterm, because then that means we approve it on February at the very latest, and then it takes time to get it started. Just because it's approved today doesn't mean it's happening tomorrow, but at least it makes it available and eligible for us to start it when the ability to happens. Another reason I bring this up is, and this is a question again directed towards Mr. Carter, if we hired all 1,058, 59, whatever it was that you said, 0.6, we had a lot of carryover last year. And it looks to me, when I look through all of the budgets, that there's a lot of borrowing from the carryovers to ensure that we're full on our salaries and able to make that happen. We use the carryover versus using the cannabis money, because we did use the cannabis money on the previous half a year to fulfill the requirements of the budget for salaries. So can we afford to hire 100% of our FTEs with our ongoing revenues that we have currently?
So that is not a simple yes/no question, but what I will say is yes. And what that means, though, is our ongoing revenues do cover all of those positions being filled, but that means that there won't be any extra carryover or FBA for the next year to do special projects. So there is technically right about flush. That's where in the beginning I presented how much one-time money was involved. That brings it down to structurally balanced. And to be structurally balanced, all of those positions have to be budgeted for with ongoing revenue. Now, we know that they aren't always, there's quite a few not filled. That would be a slippery slope to where, because we're so even, it would start to decline over time.
But it's tight.
Very, very tight.
And last time in June, you talked about potentially in 3 years, if we keep spending the way we are, and we're adding positions, that we may have an issue if cannabis doesn't continue to accrue. And
Correct, and the main reason for that is because any of the extras other than staff start to decline to where you can't buy that extra vehicle or anything along those capital project lines, because that is what is purchased with the one-time money that would simply go away because everything is utilized for positions and just staying afloat with services and supplies. That's the kind of thing that would go away.
right, thank you. And so the reason I bring it up is I want us to be able to progress and do better. I want us to not have that situation where we're tight. I think economic development is of the utmost importance, but how do we even build the team now? Again, vacancy rates have remained the same. They're about 21%. We did something after the first salary increases, which I completely agree with, but in hindsight, I think it was partially right, partially wrong. We cut out the idea that we're in a fiscal crisis management plan, because it didn't make sense. We gave a large salary increase, which was a necessary thing to do for retention and for being even with the rest of our surrounding counties, but we didn't finish out our plan. And part of that plan was to reduce our position allocation, not to lay anybody off, but to reduce the open vacancy allocations that we have. If we do that now, that would give us not only a little bit more wiggle room, but the ability to build that department or division or whatever it is to be able to say, look, it's budgeted, it makes sense, and it's also to help us grow our future revenues. And so that is what I'd like to offer to the board is to, I don't have anything specific because I think it needs to be done methodically, but to look at a reduction. I don't know if that's a 2% reduction, a 5% reduction, again, only looking at the open vacancies and which ones historically have been constantly vacant. We just heard today that, granted, it was not a general fund budget that we were looking at, which was public health, that right now we're not looking to fill those positions. What we need to have a better understanding of, if we have open positions that we're not looking to fill in their general fund, or historically we're just struggling to get them filled in, do we have an opportunity where that final step of the fiscal crisis management plan that we didn't take can happen, provide us the level of revenue that we need to be able to build that department, and then maybe 3 months from now we can be flying for the positions to be able to hire the people that can get those things started. So that's my thought process and what I would like to see, just because that right there is revenue generation, because that's what that specific division, which I think it should be a division, not a department, would be focused on constantly.
Yes, I do. Actually agree with Bruno on it being a division. I think it should be part of admin. And the reason being that CDD, normally you would have your economic development and your CDD group together. However, I don't think CDD has that capacity now or will have it in the near future. It would, I think it's years out. Yeah, so I think that the good fit would be in the admin office, unless Lars volunteers for another division.
Got some painting down.
So yes, that's my opinion, and I'll also defer to
Stephen.
Yeah.
Well, I do also want to make sure that it is clear again that there is funding through at least the end of 2024 to where it wouldn't even touch our ongoing revenue until that point in time. Because we have so much set aside in ARPA, it can easily pay for 2-3 positions a year through that time period with supplies even, if that is the wish of the board. We wouldn't have any general fund draw until at that point.
And the reason I look at that is that that would be almost like a 1 year, one time with the amount I think that we set aside for that.
In ARPA?
Yeah.
So the ARPA is about 2 million set aside for that, and it
For
goes
housing?
through. No, it's for, housing department / contract.
I thought it was like 700.
I will look it up right this second.
I could be absolutely mistaken. Most likely you are right.
I'm not going there until I see it.
Just like to make a comment too, as we move forward with that, I definitely think it is something that we need to continue the conversation with. I think the ARPA funds too, I think realistically, that it will be extended out. I know 2024 is the deadline. It's right around the corner. I know that most agencies are kind of looking at it like that too, for the future. So almost everything that's come out, whether it's CARES Act money, everything, there's been some type of extension each time those deadlines are coming down. So, it could be 2026 realistically, or something like that in that area. I know we had that conversation too, and you're just talking general fund positions, right? Just general fund positions is all you're talking about. Because I know you were talking about, public, different things. So getting that analysis, we did have that discussion on that big portion about, but we also heard from a lot of our, almost every director of, that once you let that position go, it may never come back. And I know that's something we balance. We want to make sure that we're not only promoting, as we did with the raises and other things, but we're also supporting our directors and looking at, hopefully, the vision is to fill them. But I think it would be fiscally responsible for us to look at that at mid-year budget, to say, hey, here, 5, 10, or 15, because I was trying to figure that out in my mind. Is it a 50% reduction of what we were anticipating during our budget crisis plan that we had? And I'm using the wrong term now, fiscal crisis plan. So I definitely think that conversation needs to go, because we keep trying to climb that hill and we ain't getting nowhere. Then we need to make some adjustments and bring those folks on board that we can, and create some other divisions, just as you brought up, Supervisor Sabatier, to help us move forward. So I think mid-year, from my point, is where that's at. One other thing I'm looking at too, by then, we've got 5 of us having this conversation. So to look at that, maybe with some fresh new eyes, whoever ends up being in that District 4 position.
So definitely before mid-year, we can look at, and it would actually have to be on a monthly basis, because the positions change that often, where I can get my staff can get the report from HR, like the report that Supervisor Sabatier is working off of right now. We are structurally sound and right now. So it's a matter of, because we can't fill the 20%, it turns into FBA for the next year. And is that relatively what we're trying to cut down on?
I see it as money that's trapped.
As FBA for the next year for one-time expenses like trucks?
You can't eliminate all, but.
Yeah. Okay, one more comment.
Go ahead,
on
go ahead.
marketing and economic
I'm going to
development.
make it more complicated.
Yeah, so with the 2 cities too, and I think they are both using that marketing firm. I think it may be the same one, it may not be, but looking at that, I think any energy being put into the county through both the cities, we should, I just think we should all do it. We're not always going to agree on everything, not saying that, but working together and using that synergy, I mean, that makes sense. And I don't know the name of the group, but I do know there's that group out there. We've seen some of the studies, or at least read it in the newspaper, on how they're moving forward to look at those things. As you can tell, my big push is for hotel rooms, around the lake, to really do that, because that is just going to take that next step for our marketing and tourism. And the industries we have already built here in the county that just need to keep them from 24-hour visit to a 48 or 72-hour visit, that's just going to benefit everybody.
Agreed.
So I'm going to complicate this conversation by bringing up the benefits that we have for our employees and the health care that is likely contributing to this, because if you're, we want to encourage single people to move here, start their family. The minute they get married, it costs them a lot of money if they're going to carry them on their insurance. And then the minute they have a child, they're likely looking for another job. And I don't know if I'm the only one here that has my family on the health plan, but with the increases going up 10%, it's going to cost me $1,500 a month. And that's 30% of my gross salary. And I just give myself as an example. We have to do better for our staff. I did speak with HR. Actually, that's one of the things that the correctional officers put, and I reached out to Sheriff Martin and texted him about it during lunch. That's one of the things the correctional officers cited as well during their exit interviews, is the insurance. They don't have 80/20. So we've done the raises. We're on a good track. But I think this is the part of the conversation where we have to continue that work and that investment in our people, and how do we get them to stay here and be covered and not have this job be a burden for them and their families.
You mean a financial burden?
A financial burden, yeah.
And that's customary, not only it's just us, I know the fire districts are dealing with the same thing. That's a Lake County issue. As soon as they have a family, they're gone, especially in this area, because of our benefits.
Well, and our $1,000 stipend with the increases this year is barely covering an individual. So we have a 10% increase, or pretty much any increase next year. The individuals are going to have to start paying too.
Well, my only comment is that yes, we want to help, but I don't know that this conversation should be done publicly, just because that's a negotiating term.
Well, I think we give direction to have staff look at it more, look into it more. We're not going to solve it right now.
Don't we have a committee? Insurance
Yeah.
committee?
Yeah, and I do know that. Okay. I do know that this item will be added to the department heads quarterly, just for discussion amongst the department heads.
Are you on the insurance?
Yeah, I'm on the insurance committee, and what's the other committee? Class and Comp or CCR, yeah. Both those. And I know these conversations are always ongoing, but absolutely. And we did the conversations about getting the various stuff. So this is just the continuation. So I completely agree with the insurance costs of that admin coming back, CAO coming back and looking at these opportunities, because, yeah, what a challenge. And it's not only us, it's the school, it's everywhere. It's the school district, it's everyone that's dealing with this, the housing and the benefits. I mean, those are the huge things for recruitment, retention, and other opportunities for everyone. So, yeah, I'm on board with that conversation of what is realistic, but we know we did make some changes in the past that got us to that $1,000, and yeah, we need to have a further conversation.
I know you wanted to
If
add.
you would humor me for a moment,
Yes.
and I'll make a couple comments. Going back to your metrics and your data on your allocated positions, when you're looking at those, another component you need to look at on that, it's not just that vacancy rate, it's the value of those individual positions. So I'm going to give you some examples of when you look at a 20% vacancy rate, when I look at your appropriations, what you actually spent for those positions, last year, it was the year we just closed, 7% was left on the table, so to speak. So you're not at 20%, you were at 7% of what your actual costs were. So you have to look at what it really costs you for those. So one position is not equal to the other. So just wanted to throw that out. That's something, the county as a whole, the lowest I've ever seen us is like at 89% of appropriations spent. So 11% was left. What happens with these appropriations and what happens throughout the year is departments move money around. They use it in other ways. So they are not coming back and asking for additional money, but they're using it in other ways. So I think you have to also look at that. And I have the metrics on that if you ever want to see it, Supervisor Sabatier.
More numbers.
The other thing is on the insurance. I'll just add that when you go to an 80-20, what you do to your single people is then they pay more. And when I look at an 80-20, what we're currently doing, a single person's going to go from paying $60 to paying $212. So you're going to impact that majority of your folks right off the bat. And when I do back of the napkin math on this, it's about a $2 million ongoing that I would estimate, and that's a minimum. And that's ongoing. So those are some numbers I just wanted to share.
Yeah, but we've got 10 or 11% of our staff with families on plans. That's pretty low. If we want to be an environment where we can, offer employment that supports families, that's low. And I'll just use myself as an example again. My husband's self-employed, so we don't have another option. So a lot of people, their spouses, you can get insurance another way, but there's other staff that are in this situation too, because your employer is offering low-cost health care. That takes away any other options that you can go out and find comparable health care. So it's a difficult situation.
I don't mind the conversation. I think that it's important that our employees get taken care of, but I am absolutely worried about what that number's going to look like when it comes back. But if we don't have the conversation, we won't know exactly what we're looking at. But yeah, I agree with Ms. Saderlin that it's probably going to be something large, and that's actually comes back to why exactly we need to build this economic development thing.
Yeah.
If I could, simply because I'm sitting here,
Yes.
largely in Public Services Director, I'll just add one other department head's perspective, just because yesterday I sat with staff from one of my divisions and had this exact conversation, received this exact, those exact complaints, and I'm glad to hear that we will be, as I knew, that we would be discussing it at the department head level, because it's important. There's a huge impact at staff who, one other example, one individual who told me he's better off as an extra help individual without benefits because of what he could get with Covered California than he is as a permanent employee working here with the benefits. So that's just, that's sad to hear. So I don't say that to, beat it down. I say it to say that I'm happy to hear that it's on the table for discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Stephen?
And I would also like to say that is a very large number where it would be, just back of the napkin, at least $2 million. We do not currently have $2 million ongoing available, so there would have to be something else cut. Just have to keep that in mind, whether it be vacancies like we've been talking about or something else. So it has to be a give-take, and that's part of the conversation. Just want that to be in your head as well.
Guess we're not painting.
Okay.
Every penny counts.
Minuscule.
Were there any other questions on
There's
this?
a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Were you going to say something else on this?
Yeah, I just want to offer one other suggestion for change on our, I want to go back to the Board of Supervisors budget. It's been a conversation that we've been having over at PEG TV. There's been a lot of requests for help from town halls to do videos, to provide sometimes, I know that Sam, Mr. Houston, goes out to some of these town halls in order to do the videography, and he's not always able to do so, but we do have the opportunity to create transparency and to create a more robust system within our town halls. And I say this without the experience because I don't have a town hall, even though I've been thinking about creating one for District 2 to have the ability to voice their concerns about county issues rather than city issues. But I was looking to see if there was a way to provide a budget to each town hall so they can spend it on correspondence with the community, whether that's a survey or an invitation, some kind of outreach, and also the possibility for buying new equipment. I've been to, sorry, Chair Crandall, but I've been to some of Chair Crandall's venues, and the PA system was more than desirable. Less than desirable. I was being sarcastic. Maybe I should have been specific. And so I think that having those opportunities granted with the policy on exactly what it can be spent on and what it can't be spent on, the tracking, so that we can make sure that it is appropriately used. But I would like to offer that each town hall have the ability to have $5,000 each per year to be able to be a more robust body for that specific community.
And I know that we talked with Sam about this, and I didn't know it was something like that. I thought it was more along the lines as they were going to work to buy the equipment, and we were going to provide that amount that you're talking about
Training is always possible.
to pay for the position for someone to do that. I also had a contingency of looking at, because I have 3, and I don't know if everyone wants to use the same thing as an extra help that would cover the time frame during that time. So that's just the contingency for me. But I do, we did have the discussion, and then I had the discussion with Sam as well, so, yeah. Vice Chair?
Yeah, I think offering the municipal advisory councils the service where they don't have to go and purchase equipment, where someone could come and do that service for them, and it could be a rotating person who went to all the different municipal advisory councils. I don't know if Middletown math is the same, but they were very adamant about not having money for a long time.
They're still the same.
Okay, so every municipal advisory council is different. And so I think if we were going to do something like this, it would be providing that service so that each meeting could be broadcast in the same way and there's consistency there. But I think there's going to be a lot of oversight issues if we just hand the money, and like math, we may not be prepared for it, may not want it. I don't know. That's my thought on that.
That's exactly what we were just discussing as well. How could even possibly happen?
And so just as an offer, because I was trying to make it more open for what the needs could be, but if it's really just about the videography and the transparency and the access to these meetings, maybe an MOU with PEG TV is something that I can bring back to the board for discussion.
That's what I thought we talked about a while back with Sam, but Sam, yeah, please come up and help us with this. The other thing was, I was, with my discussion and thought was also to have someone that helps them coordinate. These are volunteers. So, and I know Carolyn, and I know Johanna, and I know Kimberly and Shannon, they help them, you know, but along with everything else. And so that's why I was looking at also the extra help, or the idea that Sam had about, you know, working on that. So it was just someone that would help as well, and then rather than me being the guy that does Zoom and having to, there was someone that can come and coordinate that, but I'll let Sam go ahead and.
Well, okay, Sam Houston, I'm just a videographer here. What the original proposal was, one is that PEG has a capital budget, but they do not have an operating budget. But PEG is one of their roles is to supply content, governmental content, public content, education content. So and the communities around here, we have seen and we have proven evidence with how the county has used social media to engage the community so that there is not this diversity like there was. It has subsided considerably. And part of that is because we have developed more transparency. And so having that opportunity for the communities to be able to engage in their town halls, and Cobb has at least Elliot and the people there have really asked if we could do something, because, and from what my experience of the other town halls, you know, I'll bring this back together, but I just think that there's this foundation that needs to be seen first, that having an organized way that they can communicate their meetings to their members, and to be able to have that voice is really important. We've seen that because of the community in Lake County is just, it's, as somebody said the other day, there's this huge lake and there's all these areas around the lake, but there's no way to bring that back. Well, having this town hall system in place so that all the town halls, and I'll explain it, I think it can be even more than that, can have this system in place that is operated by PEG, that is owned by PEG. And this could be a way to help not only PEG television, it can also be a way to help our Lake County community. And so that was the premise of this. And so being able, if there is a way that a PEG could be paid as an independent contractor, or we could...
Sam,
Yeah.
I feel like we're verging onto a agenda item that's not on the
Right.
agenda.
Okay. Sorry.
I think this needs to come back as an agenda item for
Yeah.
a deeper discussion in
Yeah.
order for us to look at the details rather than speaking budget-wise right now.
Right.
Because we're not talking specific dollars at this moment. We're going into the details of what a service would look like. So I think that's what I'll do, is I'll bring this back as an agenda item to make sure that it's eligible for us to really discuss in depth and for the public to also engage in that discussion as well, which could
I was
include.
interested in hearing you wrap it up.
I'm sorry?
So sorry.
No, well, no, the only, the thing is if we could do this, if there is a way to do this and add it as an item to the budget for the county to be able to fund part of it, I don't think that they should fund all of it, then I think that could be very useful. I think my vision of it is that the towns or the cities involved should also be participating in it as well, if they want that kind of service. Because I see it not just town halls, I see other items, city council or school board meetings, things like that. So I see it as a little bit broader than that. So, okay,
Thank you,
so I
Sam.
will end it with that.
Thank you, Sam. And then I think, did you have your hand up too?
No,
Good. I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'll wait for it to come back to some other item, not today.
Yeah, I think some administrative support. I'd like to see a page where we can consistently have a web page where we consistently have agendas and minutes posted. I know not all.
That's up to the advisory boards to work with
get them-
the,
yeah,
get
to
with
bring
the
them in.
clerk and to put their
I know.
agendas and to get the minutes. I mean, I'll just be very clear.
Yeah.
The Middletown Area Town Hall makes it very clear, county does run this.
Yep.
The first thing was told when I come on the board. They still have that, that conversation. So I don't know what's going on in your guys's, but at least I'm very clear. And, some might take it as, you're not going to tell us what to do. This is a community area. Our boundaries are drawn, so very clear at math. County doesn't run this. This is an advisory committee of the community.
Yep. Well, they may have needs from time to time, administrative needs, and, they are all volunteers, so if they did have those needs.
Right.
And do your town halls have those needs?
Well, there's just, as has been stated, there's been complaints about the sound quality, especially with Zoom. And if that was to ever go away, the sound system would be an ideal thing to have. And then some entity like them or another situation where they can just record the meetings, that where they're there. There is a website right now that on our I think it's boards and committees and whatnot, each town hall does have a space where they can post their agendas and minutes. There's also different pages that they make for their social media as well, and they work with the staff to get those up. So that's all I was looking at, is something that served someone that served all six if need be. And if somebody didn't want it, they don't need it. It's upon that. But again, this could be something we talk about later.
Sounds like we got an agenda item coming back.
Any other questions on these first two items?
Well, there's also a hand up, but before I call on the hand, I realized it's probably about the Public Request Act, and it may have sound like I wasn't being negative about it. I was actually commenting about the amount of work it takes, and more or less accentuating that it might be a good plan to have something in place to take care of that. That way it doesn't affect staff and whatnot. But I'll go ahead and open it up for Betsy, if you'd like to unmute. And
That's the way I understood it. It's very time consuming.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Board of Supervisors. Thank you to all of the administrative staff. You have covered so much material since the beginning of this item that I've almost lost track of the several different parts that I wanted to ask about or comment on. But going back to the very beginning where you were talking about public services and the amount of time that it takes for you to handle those, I wonder, this is question number one, how many actual formal complaints have you received using the administrative complaint system that was put in place a couple of years ago I mean, real solid complaints that you had to devote more than a minute or two of telephone answering time, you know, that kind of thing?
I think all of them take more than a minute.
A lot.
We respond,
Okay, this is a real.
She's
you-
answering.
All of you, I believe, know that I am probably the most dedicated public citizen who tries very hard to keep up with all of your meetings and all of the town halls and all of the other things going on, except for the school boards. But when you're talking about, you know, the burden on your government to serve the public, you have no idea how insulting that is, because that's what we count on, is your help. And we come to you in good faith for that. To skip over that, I just want to mention something about the housing and economic development issue. This county, I've watched it for 22 years now, go through iteration after iteration after iteration of how we should develop more economic development assistance programs. And we go through that constantly. In the housing element of this county's general plan, there are many areas where we have identified locations to do infill, and infill is the preferred development strategy. I think you should concentrate on that and not go into the new, you know, attraction business. We have enough of that. We have a Chamber of Commerce for that. But the last thing I want to talk about is that public support for the town halls. Municipal advisory councils are formed under state statutory regulations, and they have to be approved of and supported by the Board of Supervisors. And I would like to say that I believe you would invest yourself wisely if you put a little bit of time and money into providing services for all of those committees, boards, and commissions that you create. The volunteers have to take responsibility for all of their own records, because there isn't any place that those records are kept. With the digitization of everything, I think that could be easily remedied. But you owe it to these commissions, boards, and committees. They're trying to do a public service for you. And I believe they deserve a whole lot better support. And thank you for letting me speak my mind.
Thank you, Betsy. And just wanted to add to the, was not trying to say it's a burden. I mentioned that before was spoken. The other thing I'd like to say is there are some people that purposely conduct a Freedom of Information Act type of request to slow down the process of things. And so that is frustrating, even though it is something we need to do to serve the public. And I'm only saying that because it does happen frequently. So I don't know if someone else has anything. Or
And the complaint process is more than just a few minutes. It's important, but it is time consuming, and just an acknowledgement of that process, that it is more than just a few minutes of anyone's time. It's an investigation, really, that goes to the department head, then there's a response. So it's important, but it's not something that can be handled very quickly and easily.
Right. My thought to bring it up was just to think about, develop an idea how to plan for it to provide that service, regardless if it's purpose-driven or if it's really trying to find out information like stated by Betsy, because that is important. So I don't have anything else to add. That's the last public comment.
No, I
Supervisor
just
Simon.
want to make it very clear that, you know, the municipal advisory committees, I greatly appreciate all the volunteer works there. Attend the meetings every month, and it's our job to carry messages forward on projects they want to bring into our communities as we're moving forward. Heck, now we even have people from other areas coming to our area town halls and, you know, those types of things. But, you know, they're put together to communicate for myself, to bring messages to the board that are in our district as we do that. I greatly appreciate with the cleanup days, garbage, all the events that happen, you know, the movies in the park, all these things that go on, completely support our Middletown area town hall, at least in my district, and I hear everybody else attending the meetings too as they're going forward. They ain't always got easy answers for them, but being available, being there to support them, I clearly do that. So I want to make that very clear. As a supervisor, that's one meeting I make sure to attend. If I can't, I do communicate with them on that, but completely support, because that's how we're going to get something done in the park. That's how we're going to get Trailside Park back. That's how we're going to get multi-use pad. All these things that they have already done at his municipal area town hall, at least in Middletown for the 29 corridor study. All these other things that have been done back in 13, 14, 11, 12, just great work. So I appreciate everything they do. And yeah, there are a lot of little things we could always support them on, but I think there's different areas. That's why the cannabis discretionary funds for our areas, I think, is so important, because there's ways to support them in things where we don't have to wait for the budget, because being on the board since I've been here for 6 years, going on 6 years now, you go to apartment, nope, no funds. Okay, well, I do have the funds, so let's talk about how we help our community specifically for community advantage opportunities there. So, I just want to say that as far as supporting advisory councils, I definitely make that a priority.
I agree. That is where the organic work happens in our community. And I started by developing a municipal advisory council, and so I understand the workload. I appreciate every single one of those volunteers that do it. And you're right, the cannabis funds is the fastest way that we can support them. And I've funneled money in for mailings. When they need help sending out a flyer, I got it for them. I can get that really quickly. If they need, if their Firewise neighborhoods need looking up addresses, guess who's doing it for them? I'll do whatever they want. $10,000 just to the Cobb Area Council's Forest Stewardship Committee for the air curtain burner that goes through South Lake Fire Protection District. Those are all complicated projects. But if you have some money for them when they ask, and we can get it to them quickly, that's how we support them, and that's how that work gets done quickly. And it is not something that you can just say that you want built. Like Kelseyville, I would love for Kelseyville to have a municipal advisory council, but it has to be organic. They have to build it themselves, and then we support them. It doesn't work any other way.
Right. Well, and it's good when you have one. I have three, and now I'm taking care of Scotts Valley too. So just adding that to the discussion there. But yes, they have their growing pains as well. A lot of them are getting past that, and these meetings are starting to go more smoother, and that's a good thing. But every government or every entity or committee has growing pains, and so just want to make sure to support them so that the way they can move forward. And I hear you all loud and clear. We'll move forward with the next discussion item.
That's settling.
Unless you had something else, good.
I just have a question of CAO Parker. We did talk about economic development. There was some agreements. There was some mention of the $2 million in ARPA. Just kind of curious what a timeline might look like, or if maybe we're coming back with a discussion in the near future to discuss what that timeline might look like. Just kind of wanted to know what the next step was, rather than saying, okay, we talked about it and then walk away, because I'm not sure as to what the next step is. I know I heard mid-year budget, but I also wanted to kind of get a little better idea.
Well, my thought is that if we ever finish this hearing, is that I would bring it back probably mid-October for discussion amongst the board on possible options to move forward and funding options.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe you've gone through the public comment portion of this. I move to approve.
Oh, we still have more.
We have more.
We're just,
A lot more.
Man.
we got a long
We're on
list.
10.
Oh, no, we have like 10 more, sir.
We've only done 3.
I'm going.
But
Okay,
10-14.
keep going.
the next one up is Budget Unit 1014, Clerk of the Board, and I'll switch it straight to the
Great, thank you very much. The clerk of the board is a statutory office responsible to maintain the official records of the Board of Supervisors, prepare the board's agenda, take minutes at each board meeting, maintain the county ordinance code, publish legal notices mandated for many types of board hearings, and perform many related duties. The clerk of the board assists all county departments and extensively interacts with county staff and other governmental and non-governmental agencies and members of the general public. The amount of this fund is $219,833. Am I correct?
No.
Well, that's what I got. $221,533. There was little or no change. And before I go on to the next item, unless if there's questions, is that I would like to thank all of our staff and admin and HR for their dedication and support, not only to this board, but to each other and all the other departments before we move on, before I forget. So, are there any questions regarding this item?
Moving on.
Seen any?
Next one up is Budget Unit 211131s, 2111, found on page D77. And this is Public Defender. Pass it on.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen. Pursuant to the state and federal law, legal representation must be provided to all indigent defendants who, in the opinion of the court, do not have the financial resources to retain the services of a private attorney. In addition to the legal proceedings, this budget unit also funds court-ordered services to provide ancillary services, including expert witnesses, verbatim transcription, interpreter services, polygraph testing, psychological evaluations, forensic testing, and the cost of court-appointed attorneys that are legally mandated when the contract public defenders cannot serve because they have a conflict of interest in the case. This, go back. This recommended budget is $2,082,200. I'm sorry for laughing. I'm trying to do this expeditiously. The contract will terminate this December. It is a contract for $135,000 monthly flat fee, and the contract amount is $1,620,000. I do have an update. As you may recall, the board approved funding for an analysis of how we provide indigent services. I hope to bring that before the board with options in October also. So,
Sorry to have a question. I know that we've been told this is never ending. Is the budget anticipating whatever changes those options may offer us? Because I have a feeling this is kind of going to be like jail medical.
depending on the option that this board chooses, it may have some impact, additional impact to the budget.
Okay, thank you.
However, again, this is one of those, just like jail medical is an unfunded mandate.
Yeah.
I just can't give you the amount, I don't know yet.
All right.
I have a bad joke, but I'll just keep it to myself.
Stephen?
Moving on. Budget Unit 1778, Capital Projects. This budget unit is utilized for the purposes of appropriating capital projects that, for general fund purposes. Mainly, it's just the general fund's capital asset list that Public Services is mainly involved with. So that's all I'm going to say for that one, other than list the main capital assets, because that's where all the funding is. Lars, is there any one you specifically want to talk about? There is quite a few.
So, yeah, Lars Ewing, Public Services Director, and this budget unit, as well as 1781, is primarily while I'm here, though I'm glad that I have been here. Really, I didn't come with any presentation for these projects. I'm happy to.
Yeah.
But I'll just say that a variety of these are already in progress, because during recommended budget hearings, you gave advance authorization for those, and that's about half of these. So I'll just defer to the board to ask any questions, and happy to attempt to answer those. Some of those, I may not have the specific details on the status of each project, but on a high level, I certainly have an awareness of it.
The main thing here is there's a ton of projects that aren't exactly in Lars's budget. They're here, but they're still Public Services, quite a few of them.
Right, like the Lucerne Harbor, and we've already given updates about that to the town hall. It's basically the same, so.
Which that is the only one that is not in 1778, so that's
Oh, it's in
1781.
1781, sorry.
Yeah, so if
You
we want to come
mentioned
back
it,
to
So I
that,
thought you were talking about 1781. my fault.
Understood.
So.
So while we're going there, Budget Unit 1781 is special projects for the general fund, where if it doesn't fit in any other department, or if the board has a special project that they want to move forward, that's the kind of item that would be budgeted here. And this is mostly funded actually by FBA. There's no real ongoing expenses in here. Yep.
Yeah, I have something for this project, or for this budget unit. And this is, so I used my discretionary money to engage with Tuckman Geospatial for building an application to do a LiDAR, new LiDAR data set for our county. The last data set that we had was in 2016, right after the Valley Fire. So ours is, we're in need of an updated LiDAR data set. So Tuckman and Mark Tuckman and Cass Green have been engaged to prepare the application, and they're going to USGS, and USGS wants a co-funding commitment of $145,000, because this is a $600,000 project. And what we're doing, and sorry, Supervisor Simon, this was at Risk Reduction Authority on Monday, preparing the application, they want the commitment. There's a commitment. If USGS sees a commitment, then we have a higher likelihood of getting the funding from them. Now, we're writing, Clerk is going to write in their next fire protection grant or forest health grant, I'm not sure which, one of the CAL FIRE grants, this piece of $145,000. But, you know, they're very successful with their grants. Hopefully they'll get it. But if they don't, I don't want to miss this opportunity, because LiDAR is incredibly useful. I was supposed to let Kevin Ingram know we were talking about this, because he still uses the 2016 LiDAR data set regularly. And so what it does is, if you don't know what LiDAR is, a plane flies all over the county, and so we can build our fuels data mapping, watershed mapping. There's a lot that goes into it. And then if you have successive data sets, then that's even better, because then you've got data you could refer back to and monitor changes. So I would ask that we put $145,000 as an earmark, but in the likelihood that we won't spend it, but just to make our application stronger. Oh, and there's the other part of this is that the state could also likely fund it too, because they recognize our need. So this is like a third backup from Will Evans' application with Clerk, and then if the state wants to help co-fund, but if everything fails, we won't lose out on this year's worth of USGS funding.
So basically contingency, but there. Right?
Yes, but we have to, the application is due in October, and so if we can say with assurance that that portion will be co-funded by the county, or, you know, at minimum by the county, it's going to put us in a much stronger place for when those applications are reviewed.
Is this countywide?
Yeah, it's all jurisdictions, so county, cities, tribes, every inch of the county.
Looking at Stephen.
Well, it's doable. I need to know what the board thinks about it.
Obviously, you know, I've been involved with these conversations. They're out there. We've hit hurdles when we're looking at going for this. There was a round that happened last year. Then there was a northern, and I'm going to mess the name up. There was like a northern group of counties that did it, and of course, Lake County was left out because we're not coastal region. We're not, and so there's a gap there. We've attempted. We've had conversations many different times of trying to piggyback on another grant opportunity, and this, it just has not come to fruition. So I think that request here is, more than reasonable. Obviously, I support it. I think it's something that, everybody can use. CAL FIRE, everybody is looking for that information, especially with the tree mortality, the vegetation abatement, everything we're looking to do in the future. So I'm obviously in support of it.
Well, and not only that, the public will be able to access the data sets for their parcels too.
And just as Supervisor Pyska said, the conversations are happening, we just need to have it earmarked. We're working diligently to have it funded, and everybody's working very hard on that, but having that backup would be prudent, I think, for us. It should last for about 5 years. So if we, by the time we're moving forward with this, we have our climate resiliency officer on, we have all these other things that'll be falling into place between now and when it needs to be updated again, hopefully, as we move forward, to make sure that we have that funding in place, or we're prepared to have it updated at the right time. LIDAR is something I had to educate myself on and, get the information, read through it, understand it. So anyway, that's, I'm in support of it.
And
Waste here.
it's a 2023 project, so if it's something that we didn't take advantage of this year, then we're pushed out even further. So, we were left out of the North Coast Regional Collaborative. We've been left out of every collaborative there is. So we're just pushing as hard as we can to get the work done that we need. But I am feeling really confident that the other partners are going to come in and help with the support of this.
You mean like the cities and whatnot?
No, the state.
Okay,
And also CAL FIRE grant.
okay. And so this is covering the whole thing, or is the cities
This is
contributing?
25%. So in our conversation on Monday, both cities were, really interested, really want this. Lakeport did have a LiDAR data set a while ago, but we're also asking them to chip in for the RRA right now. And the city of Lakeport, Kevin, as the director of the RRA, said, we need this, I want this. I don't think that I have it in the budget to support it. So that's why we're looking at these other alternatives.
If it's added to the, capital projects or capital improvements?
It'd be the special projects.
It's not, it has not been approved, because it still would need to come to a further conversation to the board. At that point, I'm okay with that. And I will say something that I hope doesn't trigger any negative feelings, but we need to balance between prohibiting things from happening versus making things happen. There's a lot of focus on those types of activities, and I understand it because we're dealing with more extreme weather and more extreme climate. But I want to make sure that we don't spend our resources on prohibiting things from happening and not having enough resources to make things happen, and we need to make sure that we balance that act. And so again, okay with moving forward as is with this, because then it requires a further discussion at a later time. So.
I'm just going to add, people can't develop fuel projects without having this data. If you don't have this data, then you have to go out and march up and down every single hill you have to look at it yourself and analyze it yourself. If you have the data, then you can build the fuels projects without having to go and do that work. So it is part of the process of mitigation. It makes it a lot easier, and we can do more. We can develop projects faster. Clerk can develop these projects from their office instead of stomping around in the woods all the time.
So it sounds like there's a consensus that will increase 2380 for specialized services for 145,000 that would come out of FBA, and this would not be spent before it comes to the board for another item, and that's when you'd have the discussions.
Right.
Okay.
Anything else in 1781?
No?
Next one, I'll go with, since Lars is here, I'll go with geothermal resource royalties, budget unit 1918, found on page D65 because you might have a question. And the requested appropriations are $1,670,042. So this is geothermal royalties, where we receive some from the state that is supposed to be utilized to mitigate the impacts of geothermal activities. And then we also receive about 50% from the federal government, which does not quite have the same strings attached. The standard appropriations here go to like $400,000 for parks and pays for a resource planner and CDD, those kind of activities. This is also where we just recently paid for, I think it is Anderson Springs,
Yeah,
for,
their infrastructure, their water infrastructure.
and we're considering that direct mitigation. And this is also where we have something budgeted for Supervisor Pyskud through Lars's department for the Cobb area.
That is for the park area?
That's for the trails
Park.
and parks.
Park/Trails project yet to be determined.
One of the questions I had, because I've always thought this is specific to the two districts that we're talking about, there's been someone mentioned something in my district about this budget item and unit about Department for Algae, or transferring budget for algae and aquatic
This
weed
pays for about half of aquatic weed spraying.
in that
the water
district,
resources.
or the
No.
whole? Okay. 'Cause that
About
was,
half of the whole,
yeah, that was a question. I always assumed it was just for those districts. I didn't know it was for the whole lake, so.
I'm not aware of any district restrictions. But how do you even contemplate mitigating geothermal?
In non-geothermal areas.
Yeah.
But the lake is part of that because,
In the watershed?
yeah, it's in the watershed, also.
Correct.
We have an agreement, Calpine does draw water off of it, there's that tie there with the lake for sure.
Well, the reason it was brought up because of the Primrose and the Clear Lake Keys, so that's the whole reason why it was brought up, so that was my question.
Understood.
Lars Ewing, Public Services Director, simply because I was referenced, I'm coming up here with the project that was referenced earlier was raised or addressed during Budget 7011 yesterday. So I think at this point, really, it's just on the revenue side. I discussed it yesterday as it relates to the appropriation side. So again, if there's any questions specifically to that, I can address them now. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lars.
I was just making sure we went through all those as quick as we could, so now there's none known. Next up would be Budget Unit 1120, Non-Departmental Revenues, found on page D11. So the best explanation of this is this accounts for the various general discretionary revenues that cannot be initially assigned to any specific department of county government. So when you see the general fund revenues stated in the presentation at the very beginning, like property tax, sales tax, not TOT, those main sources of revenue are brought in to this account, and then that's the funding for general fund departments. So this is 99.99% revenues, and there's only $84,300 in appropriations, and that is basically just in case a certain kind of contract comes through that can't be associated to a different budget unit. Do we want to go over any of the revenues and whether we think they're good projections or not? We will update that as a mid-year once we have some information further in this year, I will say that.
I'll see any questions.
All right, next up would be Central Services, Budget Unit 1124. That is found on page D24. So there is 0.75 of an employee in there. That is our mail clerk. This is where we also, the Canon copier agreement flows.
Don't pause after Canon. Canon what?
Trying to figure out what that is out there.
Big tractor. Yeah.
And then this is also where the entire, the main CalCard bill for the whole county is paid and then reimbursed by the departments. Those are the two main functions, is mail clerk and mailroom. The Canon copier charges, I won't stop there again. And the CalCard clearing account is basically what I'll say. So it's a pretty basic budget, no real change. And the reason why you see the 100,000 increase year over year, which has come up in other budget units, is because that account that's for the CalCard clearing, it's $100,000 that has to be in there to pay the bill, but the departments pay it back. So it'll always show, it's just there for accounting purposes and never will be truly utilized by the end of the year. Yes, I'm going. CDBG program income, budget unit 1794. This one is not quite as straightforward as it usually is. So this is where any payments that have been made from CDBG loans, et cetera, for either business or personal. If the county receives less than $35,000, it just gets transferred into general fund or housing down in social services. If it's over, if it's over $35,000, it changes colors into what's called program income and is then transferred to budget unit 1796, that is our CDBG capital asset budget unit. And the reason why I'm segueing there is last year was the first year in quite a while that it's been over 35,000. We're transferring about 53,000 over to budget unit 1796 because it is now program income that has to be utilized for those any CDBG project coming up, and probably will have to be utilized for the specific CDBG projects that CAO Parker mentioned earlier. So moving on to 1796, that's where those CDBG projects are, and that's where we will claim what we have spent to the state and reimbursed, and we'll pay it to the vendor. That's how, basically a capital asset account works for CDBG. And that's all we do in that account. Cobb Water went through there, et cetera. Really trying to go quick. Okay. Trial courts, budget unit 2101, found on D70. So this is where the revenues received are collection of court-imposed fines and fees, and a large portion of that is then paid back to the state as required by state law, and then the remaining amount left over turns into discretionary general fund. And that is the whole function of this budget unit. I saw a frown over there. No, okay. Moving on. Grand jury, budget unit 2106. So we are required by law to pay for the grand jury. We budget about $67,000 a year, and all of their expenses from their internet all the way down to printing their report are housed in this budget unit, and there really is no change year over year because there's no payroll or anything like that. So it's kind of a ditto budget if you would if you want to look at it that way. Next up, domestic violence programs, budget unit 2115, found on page D85. This one is fairly simple and straight. It's a pass-through from, we contract out our domestic violence crisis intervention shelter to Lake Family Resource Center. We contract with them for that service. So the revenues that come from marriage licenses and domestic violence fines, we funnel 100% over through the contract to LFRC to take care of those services for the county. Next, if I could talk. Next up is Criminal Justice Program Facilities, budget unit 2305, found on page D135. This is also a pass-through, but this time it is passed through to the jail, budget unit 2301. I was trying to look this, I'm sorry. It's also court imposed fines, but every penny that comes in, we then transfer over to Budget Unit 2301 Sheriff Jail to help support that. Going fast doesn't always work for contingencies. Budget Unit 7999, found on page D278. We are requesting no changes to the contingencies to keep it at the same amount that we had the last couple years, just over 4.5 million. All right. The last two. Redevelopment obligations, Budget Unit 8826, found on page D372. So this one requires a little bit of talking, but not a whole lot. So this is where RDA, where there's property taxes that come in, and RDA is receives a portion, and it is distributed to this budget unit to pay off the county loans from back when we had RDA. There were 10 or 11 different loans. There still are, I believe, 4 or 5 that have not been paid. So money comes into this budget unit to pay loans. 80% goes to general fund, 20% goes to budget unit 8894. And there's your transition to, we're moving on to 8894, because that's all this budget unit does is repay the loans. And this goes through about 2032, I believe, is when we finally pay everything off. 8894 is redevelopment housing. This, the 20% that comes in from the general fund loans repay, 20% goes here, and we basically are waiting until we have a project that meets the criteria to utilize these funds. Bow tie, done.
All right, I'll open it up for the public. I don't see any hands up, but I will give a couple seconds. All right, I'll close public input and bring it back to the board.
Just one last question. In reviewing, I know there's a lot of, and I spoke with Ms. Saderland about it, and she told me to ask the next person in her position. There's a lot of ins and outs of both in the revenues and in the appropriation, and it gets a little confusing in order to be able to look at trends. Like you see one budget from last year that was 200,000, and you look at this year and it's 500,000, and it has some stuff going in and some stuff going out, and it just, the numbers look inflated, but at the same time there's an explanation when you do a deep dive.
Correct.
So when you just look at the revenue amount, it gets really difficult to look for trends without really dissecting what that amount is made up of, because we gave cannabis dollars to that department this year, but it's not ongoing revenues. It's just one time that was submitted in. I just wanted to at least provide my, what I've seen, and hoping that there's, you could provide an explanation, or maybe Ms. Saderling can also provide an explanation. So in the past years, we've seen our revenues going up. I'm looking at the actuals as well as last year's estimated. Went from 50 million, 60 million, last year's estimated are 72 million, and granted, there's a whole lot of other things that we received that were one-time funds, and we know the ARPA was 12 million, and there's others as well. But then I look at this year's final recommended, and it's 48 million, which is, and I'm looking at general funds only, which is even lower than our 1920 actuals. Again, there may be some ins and outs that aren't being seen here. And then I'm looking at the actuals for expenditures, and we had 140, 140, and then our estimated for 21-22 was 180, and we're looking at potentially, 46, 47, 51, and then estimated of 53, and then we're looking at this year 75. And it's just like, it feels like we aimed low on our revenues and aimed high on our appropriations, and wondering, does that help create a larger fund balance carryover, and is there wiggle room because that's what I'm seeing, at least in those numbers. But again, I'd have to dissect each and every single one of them to better understand where the transfers are, and it makes it difficult when I'm looking at the whole numbers.
So let me give you a quick breakdown of some of that. The reason why the 48 million would show instead of a higher number is the 9 million being transferred out to a reserve. That automatically cuts out from your revenues and is being transferred over to reserves. So that if you add 9 million, if we weren't pushing it over to reserves, your revenues would be 9 million higher. So it's all not semantics, but how you look at the number. And also during recommended time, there were transfers in from cannabis, which would have increased your revenues for general fund. That was removed when it was found that we had enough FBA, et cetera. So that also would lower your revenues by 4.5 million, even though that just means cannabis isn't coming over. It's a simple explanation, but it is a large number because we can afford those without doing that. And right now, the large gap in the increase in appropriations is simply because there is FBA, and now you have a $3.5 million project that can move forward. Well, that comes in as an appropriation and not as a revenue because it was over here as an FBA. So FBA and your revenues, that's what equals your appropriations. So if there's a abnormally high or low FBA, well, your appropriations will fluctuate according to how those look.
And we put the entirety of the 35 into the appropriations, or minus the 3 million for the reserves?
It's all, okay, 9 million wouldn't be in the, let me see. The appropriations wise, that'd be in Fund 151 and 153, the reserves. It would show as a negative revenue only.
Okay. Well, I'm still learning and trying to better
I'd be
understand
happy to go over it with you.
It gets complicated, but at the same time, I know that I've seen, and I know that there's certain explanations. I've seen our fund balance carryover slowly growing, and I think I need to do a better job of scrutinizing it, especially during mid-year, where we have a little bit more of a better understanding of where we are, and hopefully not be so conservative as we have been in the last maybe 2 years, and maybe we need to continue, but just
Some of that conservative,
such large fund carry balances, they don't sit well for me, because that's, and I'm sure they don't for you as well, and that's
No,
not
they
what
don't.
you expect. But it's just something that I'm concerned with.
yeah, Kathy, Auditor Controller, and I are extremely uncomfortable with the amount of FBA that has occurred the last 2 years, to the point where I wouldn't even say quadruple checked it is enough. We didn't believe it until we started breaking down certain things like CARES Act, like you have no control over in that regard, or the teeter, because it is what it ends up being, and the 12.5 for ARPA. Just those three things are 3/4 of what your new FBA was this year. So it's very abnormal. Once you pull those things that are far outside of anybody's control of possibly spending in that year, because it didn't even come into the general fund until August or September and was pushed back to June. So there was no possibility. There was only about $3 to $4 million of FBA generated from standard vacancies and unspent appropriations, which is still higher than normal, but not extraordinary. The extraordinary was outside of our control. And this this year, we're utilizing those funds where it helps us for the future, since how much we need this year for certain projects like solar. But then for the future, that's why the reserves are in there. So a lot of it was built now, but we're taking care of our future, and our current was the goal.
Yeah, I mean, this is an extraordinary time. This is never going to happen again. We're probably never going to see this. And it is prudent to be conservative and plan for the future and take care of what needs to be managed now. Make sure that we're set up for who knows what, because we're living in some really wild times. And, this is, like I was telling Stephen, like, put a pin in this day, because we're not ever going to see this again. And this is how we secure our future.
I'm done. I just had to make that final comment. I know I've talked to both you.
Well, no, there are no
You,
more, so I
Mr.
don't know what
Carter.
to say. We're done.
I've spoken to you, Mr. Carter, and Ms. Adel, and it's still difficult for me to be able to capture all of it, so.
That is very hard, no matter how long you've been on a board, to be honest. Be happy to meet with any of you guys on the board, like usual, before mid-year, and see if we can't foster some more understanding.
So with that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Move to approve budget units, don't stop me, 1011, 1012, 1014, 1072, 1120, 1124, 1341, 1778, 1781, 1794, 1796, I'll get there. I know what you want, I missed it. 1892, 1918, 2101, 2106, 2111, 2115, 2305, 7999, 8826, 8894, 9917, 9918, with amendments to 1778 as suggested. 1781? And amendments to 1781 as suggested. I was on a roll, I'm sorry.
You're going.
That's my motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And
Okay.
There are some more actions.
there is some more, yeah, there's, go ahead, Stephen.
Unfortunately, I would like you guys to reopen Budget Unit 4011. There was a position allocation change that I was just made aware of. So actually, it's really just when you accept the new position allocation with these changes, and then I'll replace the attachment.
Where's 4011?
So what,
Public health?
yes, sorry. Where did it go? So what it was remove one health program support specialist 1-2, but add one staff services analyst 1-2. So it's just changing what the title's called.
And since we approved all of those together, I think I have to reopen them all and then
Well, there's no budgetary change. It's just a position allocation, though.
Oh, that's part of the resolution, right?
Yeah, it says,
Two different resolutions, though.
But we haven't approved a resolution.
Agreed.
Okay. So we don't have to reopen anything.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
it's the third and fourth.
It's just fix it as when you're just saying the resolution.
Okay.
Anita,
No. They didn't do resolutions. Yeah, but they didn't do resolutions.
they didn't do them yet.
No, we have not done them yet.
Right, yeah.
So you guys want us to get started on that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I was looking to them.
Someone had their hand up?
All right,
Okay, I'll give one a shot here and get started, I guess.
all right.
Offer the resolution for final recommended budget 2022-23.
Amended with all the changes made during these hearings, and I will provide as amended in these hearings, and I will make all these changes and get you a new one to sign.
Okay.
Oh, show me that. That's scary.
All right, resolution has been offered. Please conduct the roll call.
Supervisor Simon?
Yes.
Supervisor,
Aye.
thank you. Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
I hope. I got that one. That covers everything. I want to make sure I didn't miss nothing, so. Go to number 2, adopt the resolution establishing new classification, the effective date thereof, and amending the position allocation chart for fiscal year 22-23 to conform to the adopted budget. Would this be where, with the revisions,
As
As
amended.
amended.
or as amended? Right.
Resolution has been offered.
Supervisor Simon?
Aye.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
Supervisor Crandall?
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the position allocation table for FY 22-23. Do I need to do that, or is that covered under the resolution?
Isn't that what he just did?
That's what, I'm done, I don't need to do that one?
Okay.
There's two
Those were just written under,
Yeah, they
it
were-
looks like there's a task list to keep.
Oh, those are attachments, okay, all right,
That's an attachment list.
okay, I
Okay,
apologize.
so then that doesn't matter. Okay, bam, 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 gone. And so the resolutions took care of everything. All right.
There's just one final comment I'd like to make. Obviously, 3 long days. I think some great discussion happening, but I want to thank admin, all of our directors, everyone that worked so diligently to keep this county moving forward. We know the hard work. They're not easy conversations as we're moving forward, but I just want to thank all of our employees, working through this process. I know it's mandatory you do it every year, but it just needs to be said that, thank you. Thank you very much for all that hard work and dedication.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, board, for your patience and understanding through this process.
Vice versa, thank you for your patience with us too. All right, with that, it looks like we can adjourn. All right, meeting's adjourned.